right, so we're going to find the derivative of this function. Now, to be honest, there are two ways that we can do this one because it's just a trinomial times a monomial. Since we just talked about the product rule, let's do it from the product rule perspective first. Okay, so f prime of x is equal to, again, it doesn't matter which one we do first. A lot of times I'll do the derivative of the first first. So this is our first, this is our second. So the derivative of the first expression there is 21x squared. Derivative of x is 1, the derivative of 14 is 0. So the derivative of the first times the second plus the first times the derivative of the second, which is 24x cubed. Now, let's do a little factoring just for a second because they may do that. Let's look at what these two have in common. Okay, 6x to the fourth and 24x cubed. We can factor out a 6x cubed from both of those. And when we do that, we've got 21x squared plus 1 times, we're left with an x there. And we are left with a 4 here. So we've got 21x cubed plus x when we distribute that x, and plus 28x cubed plus 4x minus 656, okay, when we distribute that there. So this simplifies down to 6x cubed times 49x cubed plus 5x minus 56. Okay, so that's one way to get the derivative. Okay, another way, I told you that we could start with algebraic manipulation. We can distribute that 6x to the fourth first. So if we distribute that, we get 42x to the seventh plus 6x to the fifth minus 6 times 14 is 484 x to the fourth. So now we've turned it into something that we can just apply the power rule to take the derivative. But see, here's the problem. I'm going to multiply 7 times 42. So I'm going to go over here to the side because I'm not doing that one in my head. We've got 294 x to the sixth, don't forget to reduce the degree, plus 30 x to the fourth minus, I'm doing 84 times 4 over here as well. 336 x cubed. Now, to get this to look like the other one, we're going to have to factor out a 6x, which I'm going to cheat and I'm going to assume that all my numbers are right, but that's my point, okay? So taking the derivative is easier when we do this, when we distribute the 6x to the fourth. Taking the derivative is easier, but getting it in the form that they want it in without a calculator is a little bit more time intensive, okay? I can get to that factored form quicker if I use the product rule. So typically, if they have it set up as a product, they're generally wanting you to use the product rule, okay? Just as a general rule. Okay, so same thing applies to this example right here. 3x minus 2x squared times 5 plus 4x. Sure, we could go through, we could FOIL that. These numbers are a little bit smaller than the last one. We could FOIL it out and then we could just apply the power rule. But let's get some practice with using the product rule. Okay, this time I'm going to switch it up. I'm going to do the first times the derivative of the second. So the derivative of the second derivative of 5 is 0, derivative of 4x is 4. Plus the derivative of the first, 3 minus 4x times the second. Okay, there's not really anything in this case that we can factor out to make it look any nicer. So I don't know how the answer is going to show up. It may look like this. I know that for a fact they would move that 4 in front of that binomial right there. But other than that, they may multiply it all out and put it in standard form. They may not. okay? You just kind of have to look at the answer choices and see, but I would rather you just leave it in factored form, okay? And there's nothing that we can factor out of, there's nothing that this has in common with this term. So just leave it. Okay, we can combine this with our trig derivatives. Okay, we can combine this with our trig derivatives. So let's do that. Derivative of y is y prime. So here's our first term, here's our second term. And then this is right here, that's just a completely separate term because we're subtracting it, okay? So product rule with this first thing here. So derivative of the first times the second plus the first times the derivative of the second. Okay, so that takes care of the 2x cosine of x. And then we just have to take the derivative of minus 2 sine of x. So negative 2 is the constant multiple, so the derivative of sine is cosine. All right, the negatives here, let's kind of sort those out really quickly. Nothing happens here. Here, we've got a times the negative sine of x, so let's move that negative in front. And then we've got that down here. And let's see, is there anything that we can factor out of all the terms? We can factor out a 2. Well, actually, hang on, look at this. 2 cosine of x minus 2 cosine of x, those cancel. So forget factoring. Okay, they just cancel. So all we're left with for the derivative of this function is negative 2x sine of x. All right, let's look at an example with 3 functions multiplied together. We've got x squared times sine of x times cosine of x. So g prime of x is equal to, like I said, I would start by taking the derivative of the first one, multiplying it by the other 2. 2x sine of x cosine of x. Plus, keep the first one, take the derivative of the middle one. Derivative of sine is cosine. And we've got times the third one, which is cosine. Plus, keep the first 2, the derivative of the last one is negative sine of x. Okay, let's see what we can simplify here. G prime of x is equal to 2x sine of x cosine of x. Can't do anything there. All right, cosine of x times cosine of x is cosine squared of x. And then we've got a negative here on the last term, so minus x squared. Sine times sine is sine squared. Okay, and then let's keep going. Because I can take an x squared out of those last 2 terms, and we get cosine squared x minus sine squared of x. And I do believe that cosine squared of x minus sine squared of x is, again, this may be one that you didn't learn, but it's a double angle. Okay, it's a double angle. So what that is equal to is, let me get there. Cosine squared minus sine squared is equal to the cosine of 2x. Okay, it's equal to the cosine of 2x. And then probably the last thing that I'm going to do to this is between these 2 terms, they both have an x in them. Now I can't factor out that cosine because they're different cosines. So I've got 2 sine of x cosine of x plus x cosine of 2x. Now, before you get too crazy with the simplifying, really at this step right here, I would look at my answer choices and see if that one shows up. If it doesn't, that's when you need to start looking for what can I factor, what can I combine, that sort of thing. So I just tried to simplify as much as I knew how to show you what some of the possibilities could be, okay? But I would stop at the step where I've boxed it in and look at my answer choices before I proceed, okay? Because they're not going to ask you on the pre-response question, they're not just going to ask you to take the derivative of something that requires a product rule, okay? This is going to be a multiple choice question where you're going to have answer choices to compare it to. Okay, let's do one more here. R of x is equal to x cubed minus 5x squared plus 4 to the second. Now, this is not just a power rule. Why? Because it's not just a single term raised to a power. So what we're looking at here is we are looking at x cubed minus 5x squared plus 4 times itself.
May I have your attention, please? This is just a reminder that all staff needs to be in the media center at this time. Thank you.
So r prime of x is equal to derivative of the first, 3x squared minus 10x times the second, plus the first times the derivative of the second. Well, looky here, these are the same. Okay, so we've got what? We've got two of these. Okay, we've got the exact same expression twice. So we've got 2 times 3x squared minus 10x times x cubed minus 5x squared plus 4. Because we had two of the exact same expressions. So that's the derivative there of this function. That will come up again later.